Well, good evening and welcome back to Real America's Voice and Just the News' special election coverage, Our Republic at Risk. I'm Eric Greitens. As you know, here on this channel, we respect your intelligence, we honor you as a citizen, and here we listen to you and we work for you. Now, based on your feedback about what you wanted to hear tonight, there's a lot to cover and we've got a great team to do it, and we're going to be talking with folks on the Real America's Voice team around the country. Because, folks, it's been 1 week since Election Day, and while the mainstream media are all in for Joe Biden, a new survey published at Just the News shows that the American people are waiting to make up their own minds. Fewer than half of all Americans believe that Joe Biden legitimately won the election. Many have said that they're not sure yet or believe that President Trump won. Now, part of the reason why so many tens of millions of Americans distrust the mainstream media and the Democrat Party is for the simple reason: Democrat double standards. Today, the left and the mainstream media are telling conservatives to accept the media's judgment about the election. But of course, in the days after the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton claimed that Russia had infiltrated the U.S. election. The Clinton campaign was at the root of the Russia collusion hoax. And Clinton's conspiracy theory grabbed hold in the mainstream media, which breathlessly reported that the election may have been stolen. Trump was investigated for 675 days by special counsel Robert Mueller and a team of 19 lawyers. And as you know, despite 2,800 subpoenas and 500 witness interviews, prosecutors found no evidence that any U.S. person or Trump campaign official conspired with Russians during the 2016 campaign. Still, the mainstream media had no problem propagating the conspiracy theory that Clinton was robbed, and they did it for years. And it didn't end there. In 2018, when Democrat Stacey Abrams lost her race for governor of Georgia, she said afterwards and repeatedly that the Republican governor was not legitimate. Now, was she denounced for this by her party? Did the mainstream media castigate her for what she said? No. In fact, the Democrats awarded Abrams and asked her to represent the entire Democratic Party by giving the Democratic response to the State of the Union address. And it didn't end there. Just weeks ago, Hillary Clinton said this about what Joe Biden should do. Take a listen.
So we've got to have a massive legal operation, and I know the Biden campaign is working on that. We have to have poll workers, and I urge people who are able to be a poll worker. We have to have our own teams of people to counter the force of intimidation that the Republicans and Trump are going to put outside polling places. This is a big organizational challenge, but at least we know more about what they're going to do. And, you know, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances, because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an in.
So there was Hillary Clinton saying that Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances. And of course, it's not just Democrat double standards around the election. When it came to the coronavirus, some Democrat politicians made it illegal to go to church, illegal to sing in church. But many of them said nothing when riots happened around the country. They were strangely silent as mass gatherings of rioters and looters committed arson and assault across the country. And you know what? The double standards continue today. When the media weighed in on Biden's behalf, many of the people who had wagged their fingers at Americans who wanted to go to church did this. so much for social distancing. They said it was good for you, but not for them. And today, former Vice President claims that he wants people to unite. But look at these messages. These are messages of prominent Democrats calling for supporters of the president, supporters of President Trump, to be blacklisted, broken, burned down. They claim that anyone who voted against Biden was supporting hate. Now, the meaning of Democrat double talk changes from 1 minute to the next. And that's why conservatives and outsiders are saying clearly to the left and the mainstream media, we don't trust you. We trust the Constitution, and that's what will follow.
Joining me now, senior editor for The Federalist, vice chair for Young Americans for Freedom, and author of the book, The Art of the Donald, Chris Bedford. Chris, it's great to see you. Chris, I remember that night, election night, where they immediately called Arizona for Biden when right now we're still counting the votes there, and they're about 17,000 votes apart.
If you noticed how long it took, and I think you did and a lot of the viewers did, how long it took to call any states red, even when they were very obvious, like Florida, and how much they delayed if something was going towards Trump's point of view in another state, or how quickly they called states the Democrats. It's been from Tuesday night onward, and really for the past 4 years, a massive effort by major media corporations all across the board to control the narrative and decide what's going on right now. They decided that President Trump was elected illegitimately 4 years ago, and they have decided that Joe Biden is president now. Fortunately, at least for the American Republic, the media companies don't get to decide who is the president, at least not yet. But they will be using this information now in lockstep with Twitter and Silicon Valley to censor anyone who says otherwise and say, well, this has been dismissed, this has been debunked, this is wrong, and don't listen to them.
Yeah, they call you a conspiracy theorist for questioning the potential for voter fraud in this election when there were so many possibilities for it, considering the fact we're in the middle of the pandemic and they changed so many rules in the way that they process the votes, including mandatory mail-in balloting. So I think Trump supporters, the 70 million plus people that have voted for him, have a right to question whether or not this election's been fair.
And we have right now, we're in the phase 2 weeks to flatten the vote. We're going to see Democrats say, oh, look at this box. Oh, look at this box. Oh, we had no idea. They're coming after Tom Tillis now in North Carolina. They're definitely going to try and take that Senate seat from Republicans. And I don't think this is going to stop at all. We just got back from Philadelphia with the Federalist, where there's been voter fraud for a century. And the local papers used to even cover it. Currently, at the moment, there's under indictment is the head of the unions, one of the councilmen, and also a top Democratic strategist for literally bribing election judges to stuff ballot boxes themselves for other judges to get on the bench, the same judges the Republican Party has to go to appeal for a fair election. Does that sound right to you?
No, not at all. And you penned a piece, and you kind of touched on this just a second ago. You wrote, Saturday's media declaration is a naked attempt to silence Republicans. Nothing has changed. And you think of everything leading up to Election Day and how the media treated President Trump. You look at the polling, how wrong the pollsters got it, and they're never punished. They're actually rewarded for their work. You'd think in any other industry you'd be fired for getting things this wrong again.
It's amazing. Well, they'll never fire the pollsters. Isn't it wild? They were so wrong over and over again, and everything they predicted so far has not come to pass, because even if Joe Biden ends up winning after a recount and after these are looked at very closely, it's not the landslide that they predicted. The media still has tried to seize this. You have to be very careful. And it's good to see these people out rallying across the country saying count the votes and make sure that this is done correctly. Because, well, President Trump has the fire to make sure this was going to be a fair election and to sue and to fight. A lot of these lawyers in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania and Atlanta are going to be looking over their shoulders saying, do I want to be on this ship? It looks like this battle is going poorly and my political future will be destroyed if I lose on this. And people and Republicans will probably start to back away. We saw Mitt Romney on 3 of the 4 Sunday shows yesterday spreading that exact message.
Yeah, it's absurd. And you think of, you touched on it, how wrong they got it, but the blue wave that never happened, and you look at how many House seats were lost for the Democrats and the Republicans gained them. And we look at the Senate right now, obviously we're looking at some states like Georgia and what's going to happen there. But what would happen if Democrats were able to get those seats in the Senate? If
the Democrats are able to control the Senate, it's going to be conservatives' worst nightmare and a progressive dream. The amount of things that they're willing to do, from the nuclear option, which of course they'll do, getting rid of the filibuster, which of course they'll do, they will have a lot of power there. They'll be able to do massive changes probably to healthcare. I'm looking at more dangerously expanding the U.S. Senate to Puerto Rico and to Washington, D.C. as voting members of the U.S. Senate, and stacking the court. These are things that President Biden couldn't do if Mitch McConnell was in charge of the U.S. Senate. He would be hobbled mainly to things like the Paris Climate Accord, and he wouldn't be able to enact his agenda. With Democrat control over that Senate, even if it's minor, Republicans are in trouble.
Yeah. What do you think about the social media censorship that's been happening? I just can't believe that in America, the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, can't tweet. Every single tweet on his account, it's like censored, and then there's like a little box or you have to click on it. I mean, does big tech run the world now?
They're trying to, and at the end of the day, companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook have more power than even the East India Trading Company did. They had a private army and ran India. The kind of power they have to control what you see. I just finally switched my search engine after years and years and years to the point where I don't even say search. I say Google it, because that's how controlling it is in our society. Finally switched because I couldn't find news articles, looking up articles from the Federalist, from the Daily Caller. They weren't even popping up on Google News when I was typing in exact phrases. That's completely insane. And I've actually had better luck with a different engine so far.
Yeah, I might have to do the same because, yeah, I can't find basic news articles that I'm looking for. And obviously, Google's been looked into for their, quote, like algorithms and how is it that some of these other news sites that happen to be very liberal end up at the very top, and other successful conservative sites, like, you can't even really find them. But it is really disturbing, again, that President Trump's tweets are being censored. And this is something that I think both of you and I have been warning Republicans about for a long time, the leadership that could have taken action, during President Trump's time in office and with control of the Senate. And for some reason, a lot of them kind of just shrugged their shoulders and didn't realize the implications or what this could mean for the future of our country and for the future of the Republican Party.
If it's not campaign finance reform and it's not Republican judges, Mitch McConnell has no interest in it. Whether it's immigration, difficult fights with regulatory powers over big tech, fighting corporate monopolies, talking about abortion, talking about border security. These are fights that the Senate and most Republicans would rather see in their rearview mirror. It makes them uncomfortable, which is why people like Josh Hawley and Donald Trump have made them uncomfortable over the years. But it's a fight that's finally at their doorstep. Just like you said, it's here now, and they're going to have to address it. And hopefully they still have time to do so.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
On the agenda, I'm Bob Sellers. Attorney General William Barr is urging federal prosecutors to examine allegations of voting irregularities before states certify election results in the coming weeks. This says the president and his legal team continued to make the case for election fraud. Joining me now is the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who's leading this election legal fight. So tell me, sir, how are things going? Where do things stand right now?
Well, after filing the lawsuit yesterday in Pennsylvania, which supported by 50 plus witnesses that say that Republicans were excluded from observing over 600,000 questionable ballots in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and only in those two Democrat corrupt cities, really. Rest of Pennsylvania, no problem. We think we have a good chance, also when you consider the additional allegations of fraud there, to have that vote overturned and not certified.
Well,
I mean, the margin of victory was only 40,000 after the president had been ahead by 700,000. And I think we can show that this was part of a concerted effort on the part of the Democrat Party to do this in 10 different states, because the same thing they did in Philadelphia, herd the Republicans in corrals, not let them see the ballot. They did it in Pittsburgh. They did it in Detroit. They did it in Milwaukee. They did it in Phoenix. They did it in Las Vegas. They did it in all these places where they have this Democrat, machine. And it's impossible that every one of these Democratic leaders woke up the day after the election with the same idea of not allowing Republicans to see the mail ballots and corral them into chutes, even though the law of their state requires that it be observed by a Republican and a Democrat. And forever, we've done that with absentee ballots. Second, we're about to file a lawsuit now in Michigan in which, again, hundreds of thousands of ballots were cast without any observation. A Democrat whistleblower working for the board in Detroit has come forward and has given evidence of days and days of fraud, preparation for it, backdating of votes, going into the polling place with people, showing them how to vote, taking votes of people that weren't registered, and then actually going to the registrar book and registering at the time. She observed all of this. She was disgusted with it. She's a Democrat. She's come forward. She's given us an affidavit, and she's at the heart of the Democratic case that we have, which will be filed in Lansing, Michigan, which will show that well more than the margin of victory are illegal votes. And then a very extraordinary thing, somewhere around 4 or 4:30 in the morning on November 4, right after the election, 100,000 or so ballots showed up at the headquarters. The observers were leaving at that time. So the crooked Democrats in Detroit figured they could count the ballots when the observers weren't around. However, several observers remained behind, and they have given us affidavits. And the affidavits say that these 100,000 ballots that were not properly packaged. They're supposed to be packaged in a big wooden box with an inner box and a seal. They look more like this. Some that have come in earlier in the day, they look somewhat more like in boxes like this. Don't know if you can see that.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we're laid out like that, which completely destroys the secrecy of the ballot. And then all of a sudden they began counting them very quickly. And 3 different affiants, people who have sworn under oath, this is one of them, Andrew Cito, said that all of these votes, to the extent that he heard them being called out or he observed them, were for Joseph Biden.
Okay.
And every
and
ballot he saw had no one else on the ballot.
Just to be clear, you're talking about that occurred allegedly in Michigan? Is that where you're saying that?
Yes, I'll read you the affidavit.
No, that's
Andrew
okay.
Cito.
You don't have to read it. I just want to make clear where you were talking about. And
I'm sorry. I'm talking about Andrew Cito in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, at the TCF Center. He was there from 9:30 in the morning. He remained behind when many other people left. At 4:30 in the morning, these shipment of absentee ballots came in. He was told that there were several vehicles outside with out-of-state license plates. They pulled up to the center at 4:30, and they unloaded many boxes of ballots.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of ballots were brought in and placed on 8 long tables.
But Mr. Mayor, could I ask you a question about the process here? Could I ask you, so you filed suit in Pennsylvania regarding the allegations of fraud that you have. Obviously, you say you're going to go to Lansing as far as this situation. I'm kind of curious, what's the timing here in which you expect to get some sort of answer? How it turns out, what kind of remedy are you looking for?
Well, in the case of both Pennsylvania and Michigan, in fact, in every state, this election is guided by the laws of the state legislature. And then it's the state legislature that has to certify the result as honest and fair. We're in a position in both Pennsylvania and Michigan where they can't possibly do that. And now we will move on to Georgia, where the same thing happened, to Wisconsin, to Nevada, where the same thing happened, to Arizona. It's very, very curious that, on Tuesday night, the president was way ahead by 800,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 5% in Michigan, 8% in Wisconsin. And by the next morning, because of things like this, the votes being brought in the middle of the night, the whole thing had changed.
Well, there are people
it happened in all these places. It can't be a coincidence that they decided they would exclude Republican observers in every one of these places at exactly the same time.
Okay. So in Pennsylvania, you have already filed suit regarding these allegations, correct? Do you know when you would get some sort of answer on that issue?
Well, it's up to the court, and of course, it has to be done on an expedited basis. We have to have an opportunity to call the witnesses. We have 50 of them, but their testimony is rather short, and it's all in affidavit form already. We have to make a record and then hopefully bring it to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. At the same time, we'll be moving ahead in Lansing, Michigan. There's already been a private case filed in Michigan 2 days ago, similar to ours, but not as complete.
And how many states total have you made or plan to make allegations similar to this?
I would say anywhere from 8 to 10.
Okay.
All of them are states in which we have one common allegation and then different things. The common allegation is that when they started counting these new mail-in votes, they excluded Republicans from observing. They put Republicans mostly in corrals that were 20 and 30 feet away and wouldn't allow us to see most, if at all, any of the ballots.
And what kind of remedy?
What kind of things like we have these ballots that are brought in the middle of the night. We have backdated ballots.
Right.
The ballots had to end on November 3rd, according to Justice Alito. We have thousands and thousands and thousands that have been backdated, and we have witnesses for all of them.
Okay.
So we have numerous instances of fraud, but the common theme is excluding Republicans in 10 different places. And the same system was used, has to have been a common objective.
Now, if the states come back and say, yes, they were allowed to observe, or even though they were not permitted to observe as you would wish, what do you think the remedy should be? Throwing out every ballot, throwing out the ones involved with that? What would you expect a remedy to be?
First of all, the states aren't going to come back and say they weren't counted the way we wish. They weren't counted based on the law of the state. Each one of these states.
So how does it resolve itself? If they come out, if they were to say, you're absolutely right, that is what happened, and of course we know there'll be arguments against that, but if they say, yes, you're right, how do you think this resolves itself? What happens?
Well, first of all, the votes can't be certified then. The state legislature can't certify an unlawful vote count.
So the state would not certify it, and then what would happen after that?
What we would ask for is that you deduct in those counties the number of votes that we have proven were unlawfully examined.
Okay.
So it's easy. It's easiest in Pennsylvania because we've done the arithmetic. We can count 633,000 votes that were submitted without any observation by a neutral observer, and certainly not by a Republican.
Okay.
In Detroit,
you don't. In that case, you want them thrown out. You don't want a recount. You want them thrown out.
Well, there's no reason to recount them. You can no longer tell whether they're valid or not. Once you remove the envelope, you remove the only thing that tells you whether they're valid or not.
Right. That becomes the naked ballot at that point.
The naked ballot. That's why mail-in voting, even by justices of the Supreme Court 10 and 12 years ago, was thought to be a horrible thing to do.
All right, Mr. Mayor,
fraught with fraud.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to run, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for the hearing, because a lot of networks don't allow us to bring this information to the public.
Well, we appreciate you talking to us, bringing us up to date. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Rudy.